Trying to be helpful towards our family doesn't always mean healing. In this episode, we unpack the internalized guilt, family dynamics, and blurred boundaries that make it harder for first gen cycle breakers to say no. Bienvenida, bienvenido, bienvenida to another episode of the Heal and Manifest podcast. I am Cynthia Flores, your host. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, and proud first gen Latina. And today we're diving into a topic that hits home for so many of us, especially when we're trying to be helpful to our family members. And if you've ever felt torn between showing up for your family and showing up for yourself, if you've ever been asked or asked yourself, am I actually helping or am I actually enabling codependency and unhelpful family dynamic and patterns? Or am I hurting myself in this process? This episode is for you. Today, to explore this topic, I am joined by Victoria Cortez. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, and fellow first gen Latina based in California. She's known to remind us that boundaries aren't bad and that healing doesn't have to mean abandoning your culture, your family, or your loved ones. Her work centers on helping women unlearn people pleasing, rebuild self trust, and navigate family dynamics with compassion and clarity. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I'm excited to have this conversation because this is a conversation that comes up so much in therapy and it's an ongoing conversation, right? I think that a lot of first gen cycle breakers really struggle with saying no, with setting boundaries, with juggling that internalized sense of responsibility of I have to help and support my family, whether it is coming from their family or sometimes it comes from oneself. And therefore, that oftentimes leads to blurring certain boundaries that may look like trying to help or trying to fix or overdo something that can't really be changed. Sometimes I think about adult children of immigrants who are seeing their parents struggle either emotionally or financially. And then they try to step in and try to change the parent and try to give them advice and try to tell them, do this, do that. But clearly, the parents don't want to change, right? So it's like, to
Yeah.
what point it's helping and to what point is maybe enabling or even just putting yourself in a situation that's going to lead to a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and also grief. I think grief is part of the process, right?
hmm it's just, it's so layered,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we have, it's all intertwined as well, just culturally speaking, because ultimately all of us, it's just a brain thing. It's a human thing. We want connection, we want belonging, and we want to feel comfortable in our identities. For a lot of us, culturally, that's where we're, that's where we're grown, and that's what feels comfortable and safe for us. A lot of parents are also clinging to old customs like nuestras costumbres, right? Because that's also where safety is for them. And it has been. Just because you're on your healing journey doesn't always mean our loved ones are as well. And also that they don't have the capacity to meet you where you're at right now. For a lot of my clients, the first rule that I give them on our first session is we're going to learn some really cool tools, some really cool reflections. My one rule is for the next 2 months, you cannot teach it to anyone else in your family.
Mm.
You can have these conversations with your friends and say, oh my gosh, I learned this, and have those reflections, but we cannot go to be the savior for 2 months. So
Mm.
it's a limit that we
Mhm.
set. And it's just because we're so used to getting things and saying, oh my gosh, I want to give this away. Or I know who could use this. But the thing is, if they're not there yet, then it could be offensive, right? It could also be challenging them in a way that might not feel safe and could
Mm.
also put you in a situation you don't want to be in either. So it's really complicated because we mean well, and it's also learning yourself and learning your own boundaries, which I talk a lot about boundaries on my page. So I also just have to clarify that some people mistake boundaries for barriers, and boundaries are not barriers, they're bridges. There are ways that we learn how to communicate our needs to other people. And this can also help cultivate a relationship, because people often think, like, oh, I'm going to tell my parents, right? Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother thing of culturally. I cannot just tell my Mexican mom, like, no, this is my boundary. We don't have that language, right? Automatically. It takes learning.
I think there's no one simple answer or response, right? It's going to be, as you mentioned, it's very nuanced, it's very complex, it's very, very layered. And as the ones who are listening to this episode, I'm sure they're probably thinking of their own personal experience, maybe their own family dynamics. I want you to definitely think that, maybe reflect on certain scenarios or situations that maybe you've were in that position where you jumped into that role of the savior, of wanting to change, wanting to fix, wanting them, your family, your parents, etc., whoever, to see the way that you see, to perceive the way that you perceive. But again, as you mentioned, Victoria, it's not that simple, because a lot of our family members, even parents, they come from a different generation, and they were not taught these skills. They were not taught the self-awareness, and sometimes it feels like it's a commodity, it's a privilege for a lot of younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs, right? Because we have the language, we have the awareness, we have the psychoeducation, we see it everywhere on social media. But it's not that simple, and we can't impose something on to others, even our family members, because they may not want to see it. One, they may not are not don't have the capacity to change. They There's many other barriers, right? Psychological trauma, I want to really mention that. Trauma, generational trauma, childhood CPTSD, childhood post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and other complex mental health challenges, that it's not that easy. So I think we're going to unpack this, but I'm curious, Victoria, for you, being a first gen Latina therapist, daughter, family member, can you think of a time when you thought you were helping someone, either in your family, but later realized that you were probably actually enabling, or it wasn't, maybe there was no change or shift going to happen there?
Yeah.
What did that moment teach you?
Well, it was somewhere at the beginning of, like, the healing journey is a lifelong journey. But I want to say we've all had moments where it's like, oh, we're going on a roller coaster ride here. And so I just remember a time where I was really deep into my healing journey, and I started to pull back to sort of recognize where I was putting my energy, where I wanted my energy to go. Because for the longest time, it was very caught up in people pleasing and overachieving and just giving myself and not checking in. And also assuming roles that I was never necessarily asked to take on, but I did. And so a big thing that, like, pops up for me always when I think about this is my role with my younger brother. I realized, I was like, oh, you know what? I have been mothering him for so long, and I don't think I want that relationship with him anymore. I would rather have the fun chisme of a sister than having him, like, hide things or feel like he needed to be perfect for me or whatever. And so I remember having that conversation, but also with education and therapy and introspection, it was that I had the language to communicate that. And luckily he was open to that, because I had said, I want to talk to you. Said, I've been jumping in to save the day a lot, and you're capable. You're a big boy, and yeah, he's actually the tallest out of all of us. So he really is. But I remember having that conversation and just our dynamic shifting. And I let him know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm unlearning some things. And so I'm also changing the baseline. And that's my responsibility as well, to recognize, just because I decide, oh, we're going to do things quote unquote healthy, what is healthy? Right? Because every situation is different, but learning your own boundaries and also respecting the other person's. Oh, that's the hard part, right? Because we always think about ourselves and we're like, well, I'm uncomfortable with this. You should have my comfort, but it's not, right? It's so much bigger than just than just yourself. And so with that, it was also dying a little bit to ego to be like, okay, we're just going to learn. We're going to allow ourselves to go through this. But that was definitely a time. And I feel like that was such a positive change in my relationship with not only my brother, but with my siblings, because I wanted to have a different role and learn that and learn what it meant for our family dynamics. But I think it was fruitful because then also it allowed him to see, oh, I'm capable of stepping up, or I am grown. Yeah. Like, oh, I'm part of this, because for so long it felt like, you know, somebody's over here mandando, right? They're calling the shots. But I'm like, no. You can also say your opinion. I value your opinion. Let's be partners in this. And so there's a lot of beauty that can come, but it doesn't come without discomfort, because there are growing pains.
Of
And
course.
so that's just something that we accept. It's a fact, because there's no way of going through any growth journey without some sort of discomfort, because what's familiar feels nice, but also it's not necessarily the healthiest. And so unlearning these patterns, if we accept that fact first, okay, it's going to be uncomfortable, sort of like working out, right? But eventually you get into a groove and you find your rhythm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'm curious to know, because you mentioned siblings, where are you in the sibling hierarchy or in the
I'm
sibling?
in the middle. So
Okay.
I'm at a 4. So it's my
Okay.
older brother, sister, and then myself, and then our younger brother.
Okay.
But being first gen, my siblings and I all had a really big role in raising our younger brother, because we were all stepping through these doors first, right? We went to college, we're experiencing the work field. We had a say in where he went to school, for high school. And we're saying, nope, this would actually be a better fit. This would be that. And choosing extracurriculars that we felt would be best, because my parents weren't really familiar with what was going on inside of these walls. And so they were like, well, we trust you. Right. My husband will always say, he's like, I know your brother's sort of like your first son. So I'm like, I know.
And he's the baby, right? It seems
He's
like
the
it.
baby.
I'm the baby too, so I don't feel like I had that experience. Of course, in my sisters and my siblings' eyes, they probably see it different.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do have to say that when it comes to, and I don't know if this is your experience because every family dynamic is different, but when it comes to raising men and boys, I think like como que los cuidan más, como que hay
Yeah.
más, there's like this bubble, and I don't know if culturally that tends to happen a lot, right? And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that was maybe the experience that you had.
With my older brother, probably like my older brother, he's firstborn, so of course he's the golden child. But he's a good guy. But with my younger brother, it was different. My mom raised us to be very much like women empowered. And so she also really wanted to make sure that one day he would be a good partner. And so he grew up with a lot of women, a lot of influence of like my tias. They're just so loving. And so the bubble was there, but also I was very blessed to have also tias who were encouraging of me living my journey the way I wanted to as well. And so, but I definitely see it, right? We see it in the family, the bubble and the expectations. But whenever things like that happen, my brother is open to checking himself, where I'm just like, hey, so you were treated a little different in this, or we're doing this. So but again, with those conversations, it's nice because he steps up. He's just, but it's also been conversations that have built.
And I think that's important because in a lot of Latino family dynamics, it's, of course, either education wise or understanding of how culture affects our mental health, how society affects our mental health, how patriarchy affects our mental health, not only women, but men
Yeah.
and family systems. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to be aware of that. So thanks for sharing that. And I know you mentioned that there are growing pains and that you had to go through some growing pains with that
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. And I'm wondering, in general, why do you think so many first gen cycle breakers or first gens equate love with self sacrifice?
Because it's what we see. Children don't do what you tell them to do, they do what they see, they do what they witness, and it gets integrated into our nervous system. Between the ages of 0 and 7, that's essentially when our blueprint of our nervous system is being built. A lot of the work that we do in therapy is actually recalibrating our nervous system to recognize what is safe now and what I can do now. to thrive. If I keep operating on an old system that I grew up with, right, which is performing, which is overextending myself, because that's what also women were taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
As women, that's definitely something that was done. It's just you hop in, you see the women in your life overextend, never sit down, and so you're like, oh, I have to do this, otherwise I'm a bad person. And so we're learning differently.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And that self sacrificing behavior of overgiving, of enabling, of overextending yourself, of people pleasing, it affects every aspect of your life and how you view
Mhm.
yourself, in your self esteem, your self concept, in the limiting beliefs that we develop of like, am I even worthy? Am I deserving? Or I'm not worthy or deserving if I don't give, right? Because again, sometimes relationship dynamics focus with family members, it's like you do this and then therefore yo te doy esto, and that
Mhm.
sometimes it's like people equate love with I have to give and self-sacrifice in order for me to get migajas, to get at least a
Mhm.
little bit of love and care and attention and validation and reassurance. And therefore I think like it again is very much dependent or by many factors in your family system. What do you think are the early signs that when it comes to enabling and helping our family dynamic that we know that we're probably doing it in a way that feels like it's love, right?
Mhm.
Because we care, but where are the signs that say helping has crossed into enabling?
I would probably say that probably the first one would be that you feel drained and you feel like you keep doing the same thing over and over and nothing is changing. And the problems, they don't, it doesn't look like they can fix it themselves. Right. And so it becomes, we start to blur the lines into codependency, where it's really hard for you to live your life, for them to live their life. And so that's also like an early sign where you're like, oh, they can't function without me. And that's really scary. And that's harmful not only to the other person, but yourself as well, because we get to ask the bigger question, which is, could they survive if I weren't around? Am I
Mm.
supporting them to have a successful life? And not in a mean way, not in like, oh, I just heard on a podcast that I need to let you suffer. It's not that.
Right.
It is sometimes the most loving thing is also stepping back to let
Mm.
them learn and have life opportunities. I think about my early in my career, I worked a lot in 0 to 5. And so I have a lot of foundation of learning developmental things. And so I always refer back to that because now I work with inner children. And turns out,
Mhm.
it's all the
It's
same.
the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. But when we think of babies learning how to walk, when they fall, if you were to pick them up because they hit their head, and that's what babies do, they fall, they learn, right? They're getting their strength. If we were to pick them up and say, oh, no, I'm never going to let you walk again. My gosh, what are you doing?
Mm.
You are giving them something that they can do on their own, but you're not supporting them in building their strength, right? You're disabling them by
Mm.
holding on to them and catching them and saying, no, you can't do this. And then also, then they get that limiting belief of like, I can't do it. No, I need somebody to come and save me. And so it's responsibility first on also the person jumping in. And that's also a really uncomfortable part of this, because when we're doing this inner work, we're thinking, I'm doing such good work. I'm doing inner healing. This is healthy. But then we also have to put the mirror back on ourselves and see, where did I jump in where I might have been actually enabling my family
Mm.
member and setting them
Mhm.
up for failure? Because if this thing comes up and I'm not there and they can't do it, I'm going to be mad they didn't do it. But also, did I give them the opportunity to learn on their own? And a lot of the time it's no, I didn't.
That's a great example. I can think of so many examples on my family dynamic, and I can share one in particular. I think that my parents, they came out
Mhm.
here in the 70s and they tried to make a living, right? That's where they had most of my siblings out here in the US. But I have two older brothers, passed away a couple of years ago. And then it's me, I'm the baby. And then I have two sisters. So we're five. And I think that I could just see. in my own healing journey, I've experienced a lot of like realizations of why our family dynamic has been the way that it has been. And not to shame or guilt my parents. I've gone through that healing and have had conversations with them. But I do have to say that brothers were treated very differently. And there was a lot of enabling, but because I also realized there's cultural context, there's trauma from my parents and even the way that they had to parent. I mean, my parents were, I mean, till this day, they're almost retired, but they're farm workers, always just working like really hard and always busy, you know. So my brothers in their teenage years, they struggled because they were hanging out with the wrong crowd. They needed my parents, so they kind of like strayed away, you know, out of to a different path. And that I know that they struggled. I also think that there was a lot of enabling with them, but not consciously. I think given my mom's family history and trauma and all of that, I think moms, I don't know what it is about moms and boys, but they kind of want to support them. But I think culturally, family history is very important. My point is, it doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's many factors that impact this sort of enabling. And of course, my parents did the best and are doing the best that they can.
Yeah. And the discomfort that I think we also have in our culture with unhappiness, we sweep it under the rug a lot. And we often just want to keep the other person happy, right? We're performing. And a lot of parents, you hear that, which is a common one. I feel like especially with family, it's happened in our family too, right? Where it's the baby's crying, give them something to eat. Or, oh, you're sad, let me make you something. Because that's also how we bond, right? But it's like, I need to fix the problem. And a lot of us weren't taught how to sit with it. We would just want to go in and fix it. And that's also what makes us the best employees, right? Because we make it into a superpower and say, let's go and help people, right? Let's solve these puzzles in the world. But if we don't check ourselves, then we risk that as well in the work, taking the enabling into the workforce and saying, it's okay, I got it, I can do it. When did you check your own tank of energy? Oh no, you can't do it. Or other things are suffering because you are perpetuating this generational thing that we've passed down.
You mentioned a great point that it'll show up in different areas in our work, in our careers, in our romantic relationships, in our family dynamics. And it's almost like this internalized guilt of this responsibility, of this internalized sense of responsibility of like, I have to make sure this other person is okay. And I know that for me, sometimes it comes up with a lot of grief and guilt of like, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough for my family? Am I doing enough for my parents now that they're elder? It's like this almost survivor's guilt. And I'm wondering, in the work that you've done and probably even in your experience, why do you think this is so hard to work through and for people to process?
Because everything is, when we have emotional responses, it's sort of like a big wave that goes over us, right? Guilt is emotional. Responsibility is intentional. We make a choice with responsibility. I'm going to show up because I want to contribute to this, right? Guilt is not really a good historian. It's not really a good director either. But, you know, when we're saying, because we've seen it, that's what we understand love to be, right? We've seen our parents, my parents, they're immigrants as well. And, you know, you see them sacrifice. And as we get older too, oh man, the guilt is also hard because you see yourself having so many experiences and you want to share them with them. And you're like, oh, you know, like I've traveled over here. And you're like, oh, you know, I wish my dad would go, but also he's happy. He's happy being, you know, at home, right? But you still have this guilt that you carry, even though somebody could be happy. And it's because you're like, okay, well, why am I happy if I've also noticed their sacrifice, right? I should be doing more so that they're happy. They're as happy as me. But it's also finding that our happinesses aren't all going to look the same. And part of love is also meeting people where they're at. You know, my dad doesn't like to chill out at a cute coffee shop like I do. He prefers, like, if he were to go get a coffee and then we leave and we go home and he can make huevitos and like that'll be it.
Right.
But that might be different for me, where I'm like, oh, well, I want quality time at this, coffee shop. And obviously he's not happy because he's not doing this. No, it just looks different. But that internalized guilt, we got to recognize, again, what actually makes them happy. And am I okay with that? I got to be okay that he likes spending time with his plantitas at home. And it's okay that I'm experiencing joy. And wasn't that the point, right? Of also coming over here and having these opportunities? It's so that I get to experience these privileges. They truly are privileges. Even this conversation, right? About what we can do now, and to have those feelings of safety. These are all privilege, but the guilt, we gotta look what's under it. The guilt is the plant. What's actually going on in the soil?
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, because I think you bring up a big point, the meeting them where they're at and understand that their happiness is not going to look the same. The sense of fulfillment for them is going to look very different to your own sense of fulfillment. And you get to define that and they get to define that too. And it's valid. Like there's
Yeah.
no reasoning, there's no explanation, there's no shifting, there's no changing it. And I think that that is the main thing that I want everyone to take, is that it's accept them for where they're at. You show up, you set loving boundaries, you figure out, is this something that I can support? And if not, how can I move forward with that?
And also, you can't do the healing for them.
Mhm.
You just can't. That's also one of the top hard things to accept, because they're healing in the best way they know how. Right? And if they're open to it, then they can go other ways. But again, their healing doesn't look like your healing for a lot of parents. Maybe it's religion. Maybe it's working out. Maybe it's talking to their family members, right? It looks different for everyone. And that's okay. That's okay that it looks different. But yeah, there's a lot of acceptance that needs to happen. And I would invite curiosity into it as well. If you have the capacity, if you feel like you're in a safe space, you're like, I wonder how that came to be. And then you get to have those curious moments if you feel like you're in a safe space for that. I remember my dad, it was just, as they get older, it feels like you're parenting them a little bit. So where my siblings and I were like, okay, is he eating enough protein? He needs more protein. And right. And we all have an idea of our own health journeys. And so we're chatting with him about what he likes to eat and all of this. And I think it just an idea, like I just said, how come you like that cereal so much? Like, why can't you quit it? Like, when did you first eat it? And he's like, oh, it was the first cereal I had when I came to the States. And your tia gave it to me and it was so good. And so, years later, that sticks with him. And so when we have a little bit more understanding, we also have a bit more compassion of, oh, I can't rip away your Raisin Bran, even though we would like you to make a healthier choice, because it also has those emotional ties. So then we just get to have conversations in other ways, but leaning into curiosity along with the acceptance, if you have that space. And we don't always have that space. Sometimes it's, I can only accept, just simply put, it is what it is. And I'm going to sort of detach from being in this enmeshed relationship, and we get to continue on and then sort of build on that, right? We get to build a new foundation in our adulthood.
And I'm hearing that for what you're saying is the difference between conscious care and codependency and enabling is leaning into curiosity, practicing acceptance for who they are, and really stepping back a little bit. I think empathy and understanding are also a big part of this process, right? Where rather than wanting to jump into trying to save them, to heal them, to fix them, it's like, I understand that they have different lived experiences, perceptions, and I can show up, I can ask, I can be curious, I can ask if they need certain support, but I can't just step in without even sin permiso.
And I think we've all been in the situation where we've complained about something, maybe to your partner, and your partner wants to jump in and fix it. Oh, why didn't you do this? Oh, you should try this. And you're like, that's not what I need right now. Thank you, but that's not what I need. I just need somebody to see me, to
Mm.
witness me, and to also learn that it's okay that I'm sad, or it makes sense that I'm sad. And for a lot of our parents, they didn't have those opportunities. They're still learning how to do it. Yes, it's frustrating that at moments it feels like, why am I parenting you? Right. But also, people can only teach what they've known. And part of being in this healing journey is also being part of the ripple effect, right? Everything we do has a ripple effect in our community. That's why I believe in this work so much. All of our interactions, your interaction with the barista at Starbucks, like it has an effect. You are influencing their day. It doesn't matter how many followers you have online. You're an influencer. You're influencing somebody's energy, right? And so if you were to have a moment and you're frustrated and angry, what does it look like just to say, for somebody to tell you, I see that you're angry and that makes sense. You're not
Mm.
great. How would that shift things, right? Because we want to so badly get frustrated that our parents are not changing, our family members are not changing, and it feels different. It feels like a shift when we validate it and say, I see that you're angry. That does make sense that you're angry. I might still not agree, but I don't want bad things for you,
Mm.
right? And so that shifts things a bit.
Absolutely. To finish this conversation up, because I know that people are probably listening to this episode and they're like, how do I start practicing setting boundaries without the fear or the guilt or even the shame or the complex emotions of thinking that I'm selfish or that I'm a bad daughter or that
Mm,
I'm a bad son, that I'm a bad person? Because there's a lot of internalized shame and guilt and
mhm.
complex emotions that come up with that in their process of healing, in their process of allowing space and setting some boundaries. So, how can people start practicing
I think it's
that?
coming to the realization and acceptance that you can't pour from an empty cup. I can't show up to be, much less a perfect daughter or a daughter at all, or a wife or whoever, unless I'm actually taking care of myself.
Mm.
And in that, self care is not selfish. It's actually very loving to those around us. When we choose to care for ourselves, I'm telling the other person, I want to show up in your life. And when you call me and there's an emergency, I want to be able to have the energy and presence to be there for you. But in order to do that, I need to pour into me and learn what that is. And it is uncomfortable work, right?
Mhm.
You love them enough to die for them. Do you love them enough to heal for them?
I love that. And you know what? I was just thinking as I was making breakfast this morning around how I think as women, we've been conditioned, right, to give, to pour in
Mhm.
on an empty cup,
Yeah.
to be selfless, to self sacrifice without thinking about ourselves. And I think that a lot of women go out there in the world with that mindset, with that trauma, because honestly, I do think that's a trauma response.
Yeah.
It's learned from a very young age culturally in our society and in your family system and your family dynamic because
Mhm.
it's what you observed, is what you saw your mom do, is what you
Mhm.
saw your tias do, your abuelas, and most women, right? I think it's important to really think about ourselves, to really prioritize ourselves. Because again,
Mhm.
this is in your marriage. This is even if you have a family and if you have kids, it doesn't mean that you don't care about them. It means that you care about them to prioritize and take care of your well-being, because if
Mhm.
not, how do you expect to show up for them? And I think that's one of the things that we don't see. That's one of the protective factors actually when it comes to trauma and adverse childhood experiences, that
Mhm.
if children have self-aware parents that and caregivers that are really taking care of their needs, then therefore they're going to be able to show up for their children. And
Mhm.
this is all ACEs trauma
Yeah.
research that protective factors is your parent is taking care of themselves, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, in order for them to be able to show up for their children. And
Mhm.
it's not like you have to have everything perfect. It's not even about perfection. It's not even about performance. It's about what can I do for myself? What do I need in this moment? What do I need right now to regulate my nervous system, to calm myself down in order for me to respond to my child that's crying? And how can I also take a moment for myself?
For you to start from the outside. Because I feel like a lot of people are like, they roll their eyes. They're like, oh, yeah, I love myself. It's okay if we don't start there. It's okay. That's fine. It might even be really awkward to say that. Just maybe even just saying, I care about myself. Okay. But I know that I love my husband, right? I know that I love my parents, right? And if that's the inspiration where you're saying, me living my life in a way that is healthier gives the people I love permission to live in a way that's healthier for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can also be, if you need motivation, that can also be where we start.
And it's like asking yourself, so I love my parents, my kids, my partner. Okay, well, what am I giving to them that I'm not giving to me? So, and how can I
Mm-hmm.
give that? How can I pour that back into me? I think that's a great example, Victoria. And I really appreciate this conversation. It has been very fruitful. And I'm sure many of our listeners are going to resonate with this. And any last words, any affirmation, anything that you want to share?
I think an affirmation that I love to give people is, it makes sense that this is hard. I've never done this before. I'm still learning, and that's okay.
I love that. Thank you so much, Victoria. And how can people work with you? Where can people find you?
They can find me at firstgenfeeler.com, and they can also find me on Instagram at firstgenfeeler. And I am currently accepting clients virtually for therapy in California because I'm licensed in California. And I also do speaking engagements virtually and in person. And I do one-on-one consults as well. So feel free. And with that, I also do free 20-minute consults to see if we're a good fit, to see if we vibe. So don't be afraid to submit a request and we'll get to chat and see if we want to work together.
Awesome. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Victoria, for being part of this conversation. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. Feel free to share it with your loved ones. And we will see you on the next episode of the Heal Manifest podcast. Ciao.